ESPN Down Under's Phil Murphy, an old mate of the show. Going to talk Israel Adesanya, FIBA Basketball. Welcome back, mate.
Hey, good to chat to you again, Martin. How are you?
Well, we had a bit of a suck weekend, my friend. The All Blacks lost at the World Cup. Our Warriors lost, although they've still got another bite of the cherry, and Israel Adesanya lost as well. So, yeah, a humbling weekend for New Zealand sports fans, mate.
No, I mean, I've been watching actually the Rugby World Cup. It's a really convenient viewing time here where I'm at on the east side of the United States. Matches are 7 a.m., 10 a.m., and then it all kicked off with All Blacks and France. And yeah, it's a tough way to start the group stage, but I know that's not why you had me on, to relive a terrible weekend if you're an Auckland native.
No, look, I want to talk about the FIBA World Basketball Champs and the fact that United States didn't get a medal this time, finished fourth, the same as the last time. I want to park that for a second, but talk about Izzy to start with. We don't know when he's coming back or if he's coming back. We presume that he will and maybe, hopefully, do a Muhammad Ali and come back and claim that title for the third time. But just your initial thoughts on that fight and his defeat.
Yeah, it's a bizarre one. I mean, and you look back at some of the greatest upsets in UFC championship history, and that is one. Sean Strickland not just beating Israel, but beating him over 5 rounds and winning 4 of those pretty decisively. In hindsight, you look at some of the great UFC upsets. Matt Serra against GSP, UFC 69. Well, that was a one-punch situation, and GSP never really recovered. And they had a rematch, and George St. Pierre won handily and is one of the greatest fighters, if not the greatest, in UFC history. Conversely, when TJ Dillashaw lost to Renan Barão more recently, I believe UFC 177, I want to say 173, one of those in that range, Dillashaw was a heavy underdog, and throughout the fight, he was just overwhelming Barão. We're like, what is happening here? Well, it turns out TJ was one of the better bantamweights in the division history. Also, we learned later he tested positive for a performance-enhancing drug, and then in hindsight, Renan Barão went on to decline. And you go through all these upsets, there's all these little caveats. You need hindsight to really put it into context. Was it an upset, or Israel at age 34, is he in his twilight before we know it? Or did just Sean Strickland have a perfect game plan on the perfect day and caught Israel by surprise? Or were there extraneous factors that were affecting Izzy mentally, psychologically? He just wasn't really present. He was different, I think, in his approach on fight week, and a lot of people had questioned that going into the fight. But most people in the industry thought inevitably, invariably, he would get a win. We're still in kind of a state of shock, not only that he's not the champion anymore, but that Sean Strickland is. This is a guy that when the calendar flipped to 2023, he was on a 2-fight losing streak. He went and he fought a guy at light heavyweight, and then he fought a guy without a Wikipedia page, backed his way into a title shot, and then picked a good day to have a good day. What it has done, it's really opened up the middleweight division that Israel had almost cleaned out. Now you look around, if he wants to take time off, there are a number of fights to make. If he wants to come back and get an immediate rematch, it seems as though Dana White is keen to allow that. So it does add a little wrinkle to the neutral. I know I'm not talking to the neutral, but to the neutral, it does add a little bit of spice to the middleweight division.
You know, while you're talking, all of a sudden the ESPN doco 45-1 comes up, Buster Douglas taking out Tyson, and there was so much going on in Mike Tyson's life at that time, and he just wasn't ready when he got into the ring. At the same time, he could have won that fight, but he didn't, and he got badly beaten up in the end. It's fascinating to me that you're saying that Israel he wasn't there. Look, he was walking backwards from the very start. There's just, as you say, there is something missing. We don't know what that is because he hasn't spoken yet.
Yeah, and he got in front of a microphone after the fight. I give him credit; he didn't have to do that, though he didn't say too much. He very quickly deferred to Eugene Behrman, and then he hopped on social media, kind of alluded to, "I'll talk when I'm ready to talk," and then the camera stopped recording. So he hasn't really given us much, like you said. But all of this, you can't take away from Sean Strickland and his coach Eric Nixick, who had the perfect game plan for Israel. And I had talked to Eric Nixick on our UFC Fight Camp show a couple weeks out about the challenge of planning for an Israel Adesanya. And of course, he didn't give too much away, but he was saying that, Israel's gotten to that point where he has an aura about him. And he told his fighter, hey, you got to move forward. The one round Strickland lost, was the second round. And Eric, with some colorful language I can't use on radio, the line he used that stuck out, he said, don't be snake charmed. Don't sit there and just kind of fall asleep. Stay active, stay forward. He doesn't have an answer for that. and 90 seconds left in every round, you could hear Eric Nixick on the broadcast microphone shouting, "Optics, optics, close this round, punctuate it well, don't leave the judges any doubts." And I didn't think he challenged Israel more than I thought would happen. But the really telling thing for me, Martin, was in that last 30 seconds. Strickland wasn't trying to, in the NFL, right? When you're ahead, you take the knee, kind of run out the clock. Sean wasn't doing that. He was moving forward with his hands down, shouting at Israel. I mean, almost bullying him in the octagon. And that, to me, was really telling that even in that moment, Israel didn't have anything to fire to try and just take a stab at it. So, if he needed some reprieve, I wouldn't blame him. That was his 11th title fight and 10th main event in 53 months. That's a high level of activity for a 5-round fighter who has had a kickboxing career before he came into mixed martial arts. He just might be ready for some time off, which is why if the immediate rematch doesn't happen, I think it actually might be to his benefit if he lets Strickland defend the belt once and then he's there in line for whoever's next. So I think it's really a win-win. It all comes down to his level of readiness.
Phil Murphy with us, ESPN Down Under. One more question on this. Styles make fights. And again, look, I mean, my background of any kind of, well, I'm not going to say knowledge, Phil, but certainly my experience of watching fighting has been the heavyweight boxing as a kid, growing up through the years. And that Fraser, Joe Fraser with Ali, a much superior fighter, had everything, had reach, had power, had movement, had skill. And yet Joe Fraser was just able to do whatever it is he couldn't kind of defend against. Was Strickland that guy? Is he the one style of fighter that Israel will always struggle with?
That was as good as Sean Strickland had ever looked. I still think if they run it back, Eugene Behrman, City Kickboxing, I think Israel would win the rematch. But he's got to find a way to neutralize Strickland being willing to move forward and dictate Israel's evasive movement. Israel is really great at going off at 45-degree angles away and attacking off of that. He was evading, but he never really attacked off of it in that fight. And again, I don't know if that was something, in his headspace, he just wasn't quite there, or if he just wasn't ready. I couldn't hear too much of his corner about what adjustments were being made. Eugene Behrman, his head coach at City Kickboxing, seems very confident that they know what to do in the rematch, and I trust that. But yeah, like you said, styles make fights, and Alex Pereira, who was the one guy prior to Strickland who had beaten Israel at middleweight, said, no, Strickland is the perfect foil to Israel. People laughed that off, and they're not laughing anymore.
No.
Maybe Alex Pereira saw something we didn't see, but that's why I think a rematch has to happen at some point, whether it's in 4 months' time or 14 months' time. Sean Strickland made himself a lot of money because now a lot of people are going to tune in to see the answer.
Let's go to the FIBA World Basketball Champs. Now, look, I look at this in terms of the way that I would look at baseball. If you're talking about the very best players on the planet at basketball, they are the NBA superstars. If you're talking about baseball, I don't care who wins the gold medal at the Olympics. The United States can pick 90 different teams. However, when it comes to the World Basketball Champs, not taking those superstars, not taking size, all of a sudden it just evens the playing field out. How big a story has this been for a start that the United States didn't even win a medal, lost to Canada, came fourth, and Germany beat Serbia in the final?
Yeah, I mean, in the United States, I think it's the caveat, the undeniable caveat you mentioned off the top, that it wasn't the best team. If we're having this conversation, you and I, in 12 months' time, or I guess 10 months' time after an Olympics in Paris, then it'll be a bigger story. Then it'll be more of the wow. I mean, the U.S. had the shortest odds to win. I still think people thought the B, if not C team, should have been good enough to win gold or at least a medal. The unfortunate side of things is, the superstars aren't wanting to play. They're taking it's a short off season in the NBA to begin with. You've made a deep playoff run. They're taking time with their families and resting their bodies, and not flying to Manila, not a short flight from the United States. And so a lot of those guys were taking time off. But now the guys who were actually willing to play are the ones who are taking heat for it. Like, how could you lose? It's an embarrassment. LeBron James should have been there. That's the unfortunate side of things. But aside from, some social media waves and conversations like that, and, the rhetorical question of how much of a concern should this be, and then you click into the article, well, not much. LeBron James says he wants to play. But that's also not to take away from the international growth of the game. You start going through recent most valuable players in the NBA, which I would circle as probably the best basketball player in the world for that year. not a lot of American-born guys recently. There's a Joel Embiid. There's Giannis Antetokounmpo. Those are the type of guys. Nikola Jokic, I mean, leading Denver to a final. None of those guys are American. So you have evidence of the growth of the game, but still the preponderance of the best players, I say this with an American accent, are from the good old US of A. And I think if Curry and Davis and LeBron play 12 months from now, the next summer games, northern summer games in Paris, I believe that's June, July next year, the U.S. will win. They should win every game by double digits. If they don't, then it's a massive story.
Finally, look, I could talk to you forever. I always say this when we're chatting, but I have so many topics of conversation. I'll just finish with this, though, okay? Because I love the perspective that American sport puts on everything. Here in New Zealand, as I say, we're all gnashing our teeth and we're waiting. The Rugby World Cup is on. We lost the opening game. The Cricket World Cup is about to start in another month or so, and that's going to get a billion audience. You know that in the parts of the world that love their cricket. However, in the US, you've had the US Open, you've got the MLB season winding up, but the NFL has started. So, how big is that, and does it just overtake everything else for the next 5 or 6 months, the NFL?
Martin, last year, 2022, the top 100 programs on television in terms of viewership, not sports programs, the top 100 programs. 87 of the 100 were NFL games.
Wow.
87 of 100. And another 8 were college football games.
Wow.
University games, which I know is very strictly an American thing.
Yeah, college games. Yeah.
And one of the remaining five was the program that aired immediately following the Super Bowl. People just left their TVs on after the game ended, and that was a top 5, or not top 5, it was in the top 100, one of the 5 non-sports programs. Then it was like a Meghan Markle interview with Oprah and a Joe Biden presidential address. That's the caliber of item you needed to crack NFL popularity in the United States. It overwhelms everything. It's regional, it's national. Now with fantasy and sports betting becoming legalized in many of our states, which wasn't the case 5 years ago, it just continues to grow. It's a money-making machine. It dominates every conversation. We have a great number of sporting options. You and I will talk in June about the NBA and, maybe have a chat about the World Series. NFL is king, queen, rook, knight, every chess piece on the board, man. And what makes it so great this time of year, everybody has hope. Even the ones that lost, they'll circle the teams like the Bengals. Hey, Bengals lost in week 1 last year, and look, they almost made it to the Super Bowl. So everybody has confidence now, and then even if their team starts the season off on an 0-3 run, well, I mean, you got fantasy football, and you just redirect your hope and your viewing pleasure. But it's Sunday local here, 1 p.m. To 8 p.m. It's a great viewing time. But, in New Zealand, it's actually not that bad. Monday mornings, 5 a.m. start?
Yeah, 5 a.m. start, man.
Change the clocks and you guys go the other way. It goes till 7. So, I mean, your entire Monday is sorted if you're able to have a second screen at the desk. Just, fire up the ESPN app and get going. So, it's I love it. It's what I grew up with, but it is great to see the game internationally. But, man, it is in a tier and a stratosphere of its own here in America.